Welcome to our virtual event, Deciphering AI, Unraveling the Impact on Cybersecurity. I'm Lindsay O'Donnell Welch, Executive Editor with Decipher, and I'm here today with Phil Venables, the Chief Information Security Officer of Google Cloud. And we're here to talk about what we're seeing with AI in the security space. Phil, thank you so much for joining me today.
No, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so AI has been around for a long time, but generative AI has been particularly disruptive over, the past year or so. And there are a lot of opportunities there. From your perspective, Phil, what kinds of potential generative AI cybersecurity use cases are we seeing for businesses today?
Yeah, so look, it is worth just pausing before I kind of fully answer that to just reflect on just how much AI has already made a difference even before generative AI. I think you and probably everybody on today appreciates just how much AI has benefited in terms of filtering out malware, driving what we do on safe browsing, eliminating spam in many cases, driving what we improvements we need for anomaly detection, and many other things. And in many respects, generative AI, it represents an advancement over those existing solutions, but it also brings many other things that are going to be useful. This could be any place where there's human and computer interaction to analyze and reason about large complex data sets, and as I think we all appreciate, risk and security and compliance and related disciplines are just full of patterns like that where you have to analyze large data sets. And this is why sometimes you hear these phrases about context windows on AI models, which is just how much data you can essentially put into the query and have the model reason about that. That's why this kind of large context window becomes important. And then from this, you can further analyze malware, generating monitoring and other mitigations as a result of that, analyzing software for vulnerabilities or other patterns of errors, as well as all the way through to kind of alleviating toil in assisting humans in developing rules and rule sets and secure configurations. And really the list could go on, and anywhere a human is doing activities to generate configurations or rule sets, or where humans are needing to analyze large complex data sets, then generative AI is really a 10x improvement in human capability when used by humans to do that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And when we're looking at that too, you talk about, we make a good point that these are that we have been seeing these types of improvements over the past few years beyond, generative AI. How is the adoption of AI use cases in the cybersecurity landscape, both, the ones that you kind of mentioned, but then also kind of newer ones that are popping up now over the past year?
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say we're at the early stages of all of this. There's some organizations have aggressively adopted, many more are in pilot modes over the past year, but many of those pilots or those trial use cases are now making it into full production. And this is essentially everything from malware detection, anomaly detection, generating those secure configurations I talked about, and really any way where we're kind of using AI to enhance the productivity of people and improve the level of expertise that somebody naturally has in their role, augmented with a suitably trained AI model. People are able to do a lot more and generate a higher level of expertise. And I think that's already proving itself out. The key factor, though, of course, though, is how well the AI model or models are integrated into surrounding business processes or workflows or context. Because ultimately, you don't necessarily, apart from the kind of naive use cases, you don't really bring things to a model and then swivel around in your chair and start doing something with the answers. You actually integrate tightly into the fabric of the business or other workflows to enable the use of AI. And I think people are starting to really figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, is that one of the biggest challenges that you see right now when you're looking at implementing these AI use cases into the business, or like what are the big challenges we're seeing there for enterprises?
Well, for a lot of organizations, it's really, again, as they've moved beyond the initial kind of initial pilots that are essentially just toy use cases to demonstrate the technology. And as they're getting into kind of real full production use cases, not just on security, but across all the parts of their business, most organizations now are starting to really appreciate the need for end-to-end risk management. And again, this is not just the mitigation of risk against AI specific attacks like data poisoning, prompt injection, model extraction. So there's a whole array of techniques to attack AI systems. But really, most organizations are now starting to realize that from a broader safety, security, privacy, controls, customer trust, compliance, they need a more end-to-end risk management framework. And this is why, for example, last year, we at Google released the thing we call our Secure AI framework, which is a whole governance model, including security, but broader than security, that talks about how we think organizations could usefully manage that risk. And really, I tend to think about AI risk and security as a combination of three things. It's a whole set of software lifecycle risk, because fundamentally this is software. The models are implemented in software. The integration is software. So there's the software lifecycle risk. The second is data governance. And so again, this is all training data, model weights, fine-tuning data, test data. All of that needs to be managed with good lineage and control and security around that data. And then the third and final pillar is it's a whole set of operational risks about how the AI system is integrated into surrounding business processes and what guards or circuit breakers or checks exist there to constrain and check the behavior of the AI system in production environments. And again, the security element of that is a very, very important part, but it's just one part of a bigger picture of how to manage the end-to-end risk of AI systems. And again, we see many large organizations now building teams and building structures to help them manage that risk in that more comprehensive way.
Mhm. Yeah, of those three things that you just listed, where do you see businesses having the most kind of challenges, I guess, in dealing with how they're going to kind of grapple with that and move forward as they roll out their use cases?
Yeah, I mean, every organization that we interact with typically understands and has reasonably good approaches for managing this as a software risk.
Mm.
When you move on to the data governance, though, there's a few organizations, typically in regulated industries, that have really understood how to manage the end-to-end integrity of their data and their test data. But there are some industries where that's just not natural to them, and they've not had to think about that in the past. And so they're building more comprehensive data governance programs and really making sure things, for example, like protecting test data is extremely important in the development of particularly generative AI systems, if not the broader AI systems, because if an attacker can manipulate the test data, then ultimately that can be used to manipulate the ongoing training of the system. And many organizations naturally think about training data and model weights, but they don't always think about how to protect the test data as well. Yeah, and then finally, there are again very few organizations that have it in their DNA to think about when you deploy software or a model, how do you deploy it inside some kind of guard framework that regulates its use continuously? That's not something outside of, again, regulated or safety critical industries, that there's a lot of DNA in the system about how to deploy systems inside a protective boundary. And that's something that many organizations are having to learn. For example, if you deploy a generative AI system that is interacting with customers or is interacting with some of the back-end data to generate transactions or actuate effects in an industrial control system, for example, there needs to be checks and balances to make sure that if something goes wrong with the AI, that there's constraints on what the AI can do. And that is a normal thing in many safety critical industries for regular software, and it just needs to be extended to AI. But again, and a lot of organizations that are not in those traditional industries where safety criticality and other aspects of regulation are important don't necessarily carry forward that DNA to understand how to do this, but they're learning fast.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot that needs to be thought through, and it's very unique to each company. As you mentioned, like different industries have different ways, things that they need to think about, and different pieces of data that they need to think through. What are the different, as a AI use case kind of goes through an organization before it's ultimately rolled out? What different processes or organizational components or teams go into that? Like how are organizations working, different areas within organizations working together to roll that out, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is one of those, again, one of those interesting areas where you need a whole set of organizations inside a typical business or another type of mission or environment. It's everything from the security team, the compliance team, the privacy team. Of course, in some organizations, those are already integrated into one team. But then you've got the legal team, you've got business control and risk teams. There's a whole set of organizations. And again, in regulated industries, there's probably a big part of that that's working with external regulators and stakeholders to make sure they're comfortable with the safety and security and broader trust of the system being deployed. And of course, around the world now, in general and in specific industries, there's a rising amount of regulatory expectations that need to have demonstrated conformance to, and that takes an audit and a compliance team to help on that. So again, when we see the organizations that are having the most success with this, it's really two factors. One, that they've aligned all of their business and control teams together to deliver on the business objective while still maintaining an end-to-end view of the risks. And then secondly, they're understanding how to build an integrated platform internally so that each business unit is not having to kind of reinvent that whole control process from scratch. And so many organizations like us in our AI tool frameworks, we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we embed the control and governance inside the products so every customer doesn't have to reinvent that themselves. And I think that's one of the upsides of working with organizations that are also deploying their own AI on their own products at scale. You get that feedback loop of how to do this, not just as a process and a procedure, but intrinsically built into the tooling. So you've got, as we talk about security by design and by default, I think we also need to talk about AI risk management by design and by default into the AI products themselves to help customers do that.
Mhm. Right. And you make a good point too about, as we share those, those best practices, like people, potentially are getting better at this, and maybe it will start to roll out a little bit easier in the future. So I wanted to take a quick step back here and look at, when we're looking at the kind of use cases for AI, do you feel, and this is a pretty, popular question right now, I guess, but do you feel like AI use cases are helping the good guys or the bad guys more, aka security teams versus threat actors, or is that something that's, kind of equal on both sides?
I'd say it's pretty equal at the moment. I mean, we're on the whole more positive that AI will help defenders than attackers. But certainly, as you look out the environment at the moment, there is plenty of attacker usage of AI, whether it's to generate misinformation in the environment, whether it's to generate better phishing or other social engineering scams. In some cases, we've seen early use in generating malware, but the preponderance is in and around fraud and social engineering. And in many respects, you don't necessarily need an AI on the defensive side to counter the AI use by the attackers. For example, in the case of, there's a lot of talk about the use of AI to generate better phishing emails. The answer to that is improve authentication and deploy phishing resistant authentication like hardware tokens or passkeys. And so there's counter to the AI that is not necessarily AI. But generally overall, what we see is fast adoption by defenders of AI is going to help them outpace attackers. And there's a structural advantage in the defenders because the defenders have the fine-tuning context of their environment, their data, their configuration, and if they're able to deploy AI, they're going to be able to stay ahead of the attackers who have to collect even larger amounts of data to make their attacks more effective. So I think the good thing about this, if defenders adopt the tooling appropriately, not just for monitoring, but also for generating and managing secure configurations, then they're structurally advantaged compared to the attackers. But the point being is they're going to have to adopt it and adopt it quickly to get that structural advantage.
That makes sense. And speaking of kind of the collection of data, where are we also in defending the actual systems and models behind AI themselves? When we look at those, how well are we protecting those at this point?
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations are learning how to do that. When we, and I guess the other big AI labs and companies, were very, very focused on that whole spectrum of possible threats against the AI. So obviously, we're very concerned about risks to the stealing of the models in total, and everybody spends a lot of time defending that to make sure that the models are protected. And then there's other layers of control around the specific fine tuning that customers may do. That how do we help those customers protect those individual model weights and parameters that fine tune the foundation model? And then, as I mentioned before, there's a whole series of activities around protecting the training data and the test data and many other aspects of how the model is governed. And then also you have to surround the model with the appropriate filters to reduce the potential for prompt engineering attacks or for model extraction. And there's a lot goes on behind the scenes to make sure that the use of the model can't leak anything sensitive from the model's training data inappropriately. And then finally, we also spend, and there's a lot of concern in the industry that we hear from organizations, that what they don't want is when they bring their proprietary data to a model to query it, they don't want that proprietary data to end up training the model so that their data could get reused in an answer to a different organization. That's clearly a priority for pretty much all organizations, but especially those that are concerned about privacy and the protection of intellectual property. And so we've spent a lot of time, for example, making sure that when customers use our foundation models, we have an isolation between how they fine tune the models and for their particular use cases, such that that data doesn't then get factored into the underlying training, and so there's no risk that it then gets regurgitated into other places. And then finally, talking about intellectual property, we've also, and many people may have seen this last year, we announced an indemnification for organizations that would use our foundation models to generate new content, whether it's text or imagery, and that content is because of the way we've trained the models has very low risk in terms of it creating copyright infringing, and to the extent that we made a public statement that we'd indemnify and help customers if they ever had a claim against that. So there's a whole array of things around everything from security, data governance, all the way through to intellectual property risk management, which is factored into how we protect all of these things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, well, Phil, before we wrap up here, I just wanted to ask, what excites you the most about AI?
Well, I think the opportunity for it amplifying the ability of defenders. One of the things we've all talked as an industry about the need for more cybersecurity workers, and while we've done our part and continue to do our part to try and train more and create more cybersecurity workers in the workforce, I think when you look at the other side of that balance sheet, it's important to 10x the productivity of the cybersecurity people we've got and to amplify the skills of the cybersecurity people we've got. And when you look at a lot of the generative AI use cases for security, it does exactly that. It amplifies productivity and amplifies skills, reduces the toil in the environment, and helps people's security jobs become better and more effective. And that's really going to help with the ongoing talent shortage we have in cybersecurity. So I think that is tremendously exciting, as well as what we talked about in terms of pivoting AI to be a structural advantage for defenders versus attackers. is something that I think we're going to see more of over the next few years. And that's pretty exciting as we all build AI into our security processes and tooling. And I definitely encourage all organizations, whether they're buying an off-the-shelf product or figuring out how to integrate it into their own workflows, to really kind of devote some serious activity to thinking about how they can capitalize on this and 10x their security capabilities through the use of AI.
Great. Yeah, there's lots coming down the line here. So it's an exciting space. Phil, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you.